In 2006, me and my older brother became infatuated of the Doctor Who revival. From the final episode of the series Doomsday, it would be another 5 months before we'd see a new adventure with Doctor Who in the Christmas special. And always as a kid, Christmas seems forever away. So in the meanwhile, we indulge ourselves with other Doctor Who material, such as the action figures, and exploring the classic range of Doctor Who DVDs. Via a schoolmate, my brother was loaned a DVD copy of The Invasion, our first Patrick Troughton story. The Cybermen being on the cover was what tempted us in. The story was about 8 parts in length, but we were more than ready for it. But as we watched the beginning of episode 1, it was a cartoon. I was really confused as it didn't look like a product from the 1960s. Part 4 was the same, while the rest were within live action. My brother, who formerly learned the context before we began our marathon, explained to me that episode 1 and 4 had gone missing and no longer exist. Thus, to fill in the missing gaps, the surviving audio was accompanied with the newly made animation to make the story complete once more. After that explanation and searching through the bonus features, this was the first time I had ever learned the concept of both missing episodes and lost media, and began my fascination and research into other lost BBC programmes. And fairly soon afterwards, I would find out that lost media wasn't exclusive to the BBC. Decades prior of the 50s and 60s of the BBC, it had seemed to have been common practice within the film and media industry to disregard material that had seemingly no further purpose. But I think in comparison, the BBC have had it much worse off. Let's take the movies made during the golden age of Hollywood. Many of those films have had long lost scenes, like King Kong with its legendary deleted spider pit sequence, Wizard of Oz where fans are mighty curious to see the deleted numbers such as Ding Dong the Witch is Dead, and the Jitterbug. While it's really slim that we will ever see those missing pieces of media ever turn up, we've still got, most importantly, the actual final products to look back on, so it's not a huge loss. Just somewhat frustrating and fatiguing if you want to see the extra material. Now moving back to the BBC's prime show during the 60s, Doctor Who. The first regeneration episode, a trademark of the series, was The 10th Planet, which is about 4 parts long. You can watch episode 1, 2 and 3, but the final concluding episode is missing. So that's really upsetting that we've got an important storyline that's almost but not quite complete. And it's not just Doctor Who, there are many missing BBC programmes. But why? Well, to hopefully give us a better understanding as to what was going on. Today we're going to be taking a look at 10 BBC projects where nearly all of them were affected by the tape wiping. This occurred during the 1950s all the way up to the late 1970s. I say nearly all of them because, as always, I like starting off with a little bit of context. So let's go back to where BBC TV began in the 1930s. In 1932, the BBC did their first television broadcast, utilising the technology that was devised 9 years prior by George Logie Baird. The setup was fairly crude if one had to be blunt. The individual would be within a floodlit room. The light would then travel through holes of a spinning disc. The input of the brightening and dimming would travel over to another spinning disc, and when you looked through it, you saw in what had been converted a flickering image. Because of how pronounced the lighting needed to be, participants who went before the camera had to wear specially highlighted makeup, and the space was limited to only a desktop setting. Although come throughout the decade, the technology would be tweaked and refined into something that was much more practical. This experience of enjoying the moving picture at home was only privileged to the most luxurious families. Alas, with the exception of supplementary material such as scripts and theatre advertisements, we sadly can't look back on any of these programmes, as a practical recording device was not yet devised. Thus, the shows that were filmed live were truly a one-time experience. However, in 1938, the BBC broadcast signals, which should have only been travelling within a 30-mile radius, had made it across the Atlantic Ocean. A New York radio company, America RCA, had picked up the signals. At the time, they were researching and expanding for television in the States. feeling that viewing the British broadcast may prove to be invaluable knowledge, that they would preserve their findings by recording the TV monitor with a 16mm camera. Rumours persist during the 90s of this roughly 4 minutes of footage, but its existence wouldn't be confirmed or rediscovered not until 1999. This, alongside another recording of King George VI's coronation, are likely the only recording of a pre-World War II BBC broadcast. Although, according to the recollection of TV producer Cecil Madden, that the BBC did an adaptation of the 1905 book Scarlet Pimpernel set in the late 18th century, where a high-class Englishman takes on his secret alter ego, Scarlet Pimpernel, who aids into rescuing high-class French people during the country's bloody guillotine revolution. This production was recorded to film. However, due to the intervention of director Alexander Korda, he ordered the destruction of the negative, due to him owning the film rights and this being an unauthorized adaptation. Now, as compelling as that story is, there are seemingly no existing written documents that proves that the lawsuit and program ever were made. Madden's story is certainly one to take with a pinch of salt. The story would later be dramatised in the 1986 television movie Fools on the Hill, with the broadcast company being government funded. When Britain declared war on Germany in 1939, the BBC had taken a backseat in priority. But after a 7-year hiatus, the television service had resumed, and by 1947 the BBC had begun experimenting to preserve their broadcast by a process known as telerecording, where, explaining it in its most simplest terms, is where you get a film camera filming a TV monitor. However, this would be photographed on 35mm film, which was insanely expensive to produce, so this was only reserved for very special occasions. In 1953, the BBC did the first known Robin Hood television series, comprising of 6 episodes, each 30 minutes in length, starring Patrick Troughton as the title character, and Wensley Piffy as Friar Tuck. The series was performed and transmitted live, just like most of television back in the early days. This type of practice led to some incidental accidents. Most enthusiastic seekers of lost media are well aware of the disastrous BBC broadcast of the sad story of Henry, where the lead engine model accidentally got derailed, with the production staff missing their cue to change the connector points along the miniature tracks. Thus a hand had to come in and manually put the train back on. All the while this was being televised live. In 1973, on the talk show Pebble Mill, Troughton recalls a somewhat embarrassing incident in his own show.
A film crew to do the back projection, and I don't think they quite realised that we were live on television. Anyhow, we started the scene, Leonard Sachs, I think it was, and myself. There was a sort of shout of, oh, it's your end, no, it's your end. And we turned around and the forest had come in sideways. We had to go on playing, you know.
That was a sort of touch of early science fiction in the middle of Robin Hood, almost.
Yes.
Sadly, only clips and portions of episode 2 are known to exist. These fragments were included in a 2006 BBC documentary about children's television, and then were featured yet again the following year in another BBC documentary about the history of Robin Hood on television. And finally, in 2020, the whole 8 minutes that still existed of episode 2 was included on the Power of the Daleks Special Edition DVD and Blu-ray. In the surviving footage, you can certainly see the background projector playing up.
Where can I get a horse?
A horse, sir? Nay, I couldn't say. There are no horses hereabouts.
It's currently the earliest surviving footage of Troughton on television. In 1952, BBC technician Peter Axon began experimenting to see if he could find an alternative of recording live TV programmes at a more affordable cost. This was when he devised filming programmes on magnetic tapes, the same kind that was used to record sound. He would tamper and tinker with the technology for the next 5 years. The Robin Hood miniseries made a year after Axon's endeavour of the technology. It's believed to have been one of the earliest BBC programmes recorded to magnetic tape, and one of the earliest ones to still somewhat exist. Additionally, Peter Axon eventually came into limitations of his technology, finding that he could only record 15 minutes of programme, hence why the Robin Hood show, produced during the trial period of his experiments, only has 8 minutes of its second episode surviving. In April of 1958, Peter Axon's new fine-tuned recording machine was demonstrated on the BBC programme Panorama, naming the device VERA, standing for Visual Electronic Recording Apparatus. Peter Axon had designed the magnetic reels to be taped over and reused, so on one hand he provided the BBC an accessible way to record current programmes. But then on the other hand, it wasn't a guarantee that the programme would be a permanent fixture in the archive. At the time, reruns on the BBC were extremely rare, and the VHS and Betamax home media market was still another 17 years away. Just nobody could have predicted the longevity that many of these programs were going to have. Later that year, a new American rendition of the recording technology, Ampex, was manufactured and could record programs longer than 15 minutes.
Well, there you are.
Muffin the Mule was one of the earliest sensational children's characters on BBC television. The Muffin marionette originated from the Hogarth Puppet Company. The marionette was made in 1933 and debuted on stage in 1934. Originally, Muffin was made as a double act alongside a clown puppet, all part of a circus routine of the show, although the clown and mule were retired in 1938. But after Muffin's hiatus over World War II, TV producers Andrew Miller-Jones and eventual host of The Muffin Show Annette Mills approached Hogarth Puppets if they could use their array of marionettes for a children's programme. And just a year after the conclusion of World War II in 1946, the Kicking Mule, now named Muffin, and Krampus the Clown debuted on live BBC television. Although eventually Krampus was dropped from the main lineup, the Muffin the Mule show ran for 9 years, although unexpectedly ended in 1955 due to the unfortunate passing of Annette Mills, who was only age 61.
Yes, Muffin. I'm sorry too.
Afterwards, Muffin then moved over to ITV, with the series there lasting from 1956 to 1957. And then, after 48 years, Muffin returned back to BBC television, airing on the CBeebies channel. In an animated hand-drawn series, reruns continued up until 2011, going all the way back to the original BBC rendition of Annette Mills. Made so early on in television's infancy, it's no surprise that Muffin has missing episodes. Exactly how many are missing is unclear, as there's no official episode count. But what we do know, from a decade of programming, only 20 episodes have survived to the 21st century. All of the existing programs were included as part of a 60th anniversary box set of Muffin the Mule, 4 of which had previously never been released on home media. It additionally includes some supplementary Muffin material.
Well, well, I say, Sooty, look, it's Muffin.
But one interesting one in particular is a Muffin the Mule cutout cartoon, titled Muffin and the Reluctant Carrot. The credits list the animation being done by Hogarth, the original creators of Muffin the Mule, but the DVD and booklet that accompanies the set provides no information as to when the cartoon was produced and what its purpose was. The closest in terms of information I could find about the animation was a very brief mention on the Wikipedia article of Muffin the Mule. Apparently 3 cartoons were made between 74 and 75, all based on a Muffin's book that was published in the Soviet Union, so I'm guessing that this must be the background details of this cartoon. But then if there were 3 made, what happened to the other 2? How did this involve Soviet Russia? And was this material ever aired on television? With no citation next to the brief mention on Wikipedia, it makes it all the more mysterious. Beginning in 1962, Z-Cars was a police soap opera. It was amongst one of the final scripted BBC programmes to be performed, produced and transmitted live. Even by this point, it was deemed to be a bit old-fashioned to produce a series like Z-Cars in this way, but series producer David Rose felt that this helped to give it a pacier edge. The series was also notable for featuring a very young Brian Blessed, who was about 26 years of age when Z-Cars first launched. It was one of his earliest TV roles, playing PC Fancy Smith. In Series 5, the programme had came to a finale in December of 1965. Series 1, 4 and 5 had either more or less than a dozen missing episodes each. Series 3 had the least amount of missing episodes, only 5 in total, with Series 2 having a grand total of 26 missing episodes, the most so far. Eventually, Z-Cars would return in March of 1967, after the BBC was struggling to find another suitable soap opera. From this point up until the early 1970s, the programme nearly aired twice weekly. Joseph Brady and James Ellis were the only two original cast members to return regularly for the continuation. Series 6 would have a grand total of 416 episodes, but 308 of those are missing, making it the heaviest hit of the whole series. Series 7 with 115 episodes have 82 missing. By Series 8, numbers drastically dropped down to only 5 missing episodes out of 33, and thankfully the final 4 remaining series are fully complete in the BBC archive. Out of 801 episodes that were produced over 12 seasons, only 339 have survived to present day, leaving a grand total of 462 episodes still missing. For close to 2 decades, it was believed that the pilot episode to Z-Cars was long gone, but the writer of the episode, Alan Pryor, actually received the episode from the man who was meant to destroy it. You see, a technician that was working for the BBC at the time, his children really loved the series, so he couldn't bring himself to destroy the episode. Thus, he secretly brought it home for him and his family's enjoyment. Thanks to those circumstances, we have the episode to view today. For the last 70 years in Britain, there's not been one generation that's gone on by without Sooty, a magical little bear with a quiet voice, who relies on the aid of a human host to speak on his behalf. So far, there's been 3 presenters, the most recent Richard Cadell, the prior was Matthew Corbett, and the very first was his dad, Harry Corbett. Gradually, more puppet characters would come in the lineup, such as Sweep the dog who squeaks, and Harry really wanted to introduce a female character to the show, but the BBC declined this, saying that it'd be creeping in sex for a children's programme. Harry rather naively told the story to a journalist, and the press went wild with the story.
So the BBC rang me up and said, "What is going on? Have you got a vendetta against the BBC? We have a contract going through at the present time, and it will not be signed if you say one more word." I said, "But I haven't said anything except the truth, you know." Anyway, after all that, we had to have a girlfriend because we'd got thousands of pounds worth of publicity.
This led way to the creation of Sue the Panda, who was actually blessed with a speaking voice, unlike Sooty and Sweep. Sooty first appeared on BBC television on variety shows in 1952, and then got his own main show 3 years later. The BBC had produced 14 series with Sooty and Harry Corbett from 1955 to 1967, before production had changed over to ITV and Thames Television. While it can be a safe, educated guess that given the BBC's track record, that there are likely BBC Sooty episodes that no longer exist in their archives. I couldn't find a source on how complete the Sooty series is. The Wikipedia for Sooty does list all the Sooty episodes that were ever made, but it doesn't provide any additional information, and many of the episodes listed aren't even given titles, so that makes external research somewhat difficult. Richard Cadell, the current host and copyright holder of the Sooty franchise, released 3 DVD volumes of the Harry Corbett era of Sooty, dating from the 50s to the 70s. The earliest surviving TV clip of Sooty was a segment that Harry Corbett was commissioned for the Mickey Mouse Show. In terms of black and white BBC episodes, there's an unofficial upload of a 1963 episode Inferior Decorators, and then half of an episode recorded off a projector screen, titled Party Time, that was either made in the early or late 60s. On the rare DVD set Sooty Unglove World Premiere charity event, shows film content on what's believed to be the last location filming for the Sooty show by the BBC. The footage came from a 2-part episode titled The Wind Wander. With the exception of these mute extracts, the whole episode no longer exists. The DVD edition included other mute footage, believed to belong to other Sooty BBC episodes that no longer exist. Oh, so here's something a little bit saucy. The disc includes some behind the scenes footage of filming Sooty in Code, where the conversations from the cast and crew is very un-PG.
The guy that was a total wanker, and when he gets this home, I hate him. I just can't get rid of him. I've been trying for years to get rid of him.
Monitor
He's
check,
like a
please, for Sally.
Jeff?
You alright, mates? Okay, so about roughly halfway through our video. If this is your first time viewing one of my projects, and if you're really enjoying the topic so far, then I do hope you consider to subscribe to the channel, as it would be very much appreciated to join me along the journey of covering more lost and obscure media. We've recently surpassed 40,000 subscribers, but when we get to 50,000, I'm going to be doing another epic list video. It's not going to be a 10 nor 20, but 50 topics. What on? Well, here's a little hint in the meanwhile. Also, if you want to stay up to date on ongoing projects, then be sure to follow me on social media. Okay, now I think we ought to get back to the next entry now. Dad's Army is amongst one of the best regarded and well-loved British comedies ever made. The series set during the events of World War II, mainly concerning the Home Guard of mainland Britain, with the platoon made up of men deemed unfit to be fighting in the first line, or participating in major military action. For most of the characters, it was to do with their senior age, hence the name Dad's Army. Compared to the survival rate of most other shows, Dad's Army was extremely lucky, as each of the 9 seasons virtually exists in their entirety in the BBC archive. That is, with the exception of Series 2. You see, the main reason as to why most of these episodes have survived was to do with duplicate copies being sent overseas for foreign broadcasters. Series 1 failed to flourish in this market, thus there were fewer copies made for Series 2, but by the time of Series 3, interest grew overseas for sales, thus additional copies for later series resumed. Out of the 6 episodes produced in Season 2, only 3 of them remain. In November of 2008, the audio from the original broadcast episode A Strike for Fraser, one of the Missing Dad Army programmes, was returned to the BBC. In 2016, animation was produced to accompany the audio. In 2019, UK TV Gold recreated the 3 Missing Dad Army episodes with a new cast. The first 2 seasons of Dad's Army were made in black and white, but from Series 3 onwards, the whole show was produced in colour. Sadly, a Series 3 episode, Room at the Bottom, despite being broadcast in colour, only existed in a black and white format. But there was a light of optimism to restore the colour. Now, a lot of this ingenuity came from the Doctor Who restoration team, where many of the 1970s Doctor Who episodes that were filmed in colour sadly only survived in the black and white format. But the restoration team, or devoted Whovians as I like to dub them, found a fairly complex but at the same time achievable way to restore the colour, so explaining it in its most simplest terms. The copy of the Dad's Army episode was a tele-recording. Now, recording a TV monitor isn't exactly perfect quality. A side effect of this process is that it left some artificial dotting across the picture, but that would be to the restoration's team advantage, as those dots were an artifact left behind after recording a colour TV monitor. So after getting a computer to decode the patterns, the results led to a calculation on what the colour picture would look like, thus bringing Room at the Bottom back to how it was originally meant to look. Basil Brush was a fox puppet character that spoke with a very sophisticated voice. In fact, directly quoting from the British James Rolfe named Headphones UK, he said in his retrospective,
"With the way that he talks and the way his personality is presented, he'd be the kind of person you'd probably see on the back of an overfed horse shooting foxes."
I'm never caught out by household odours.
Basil made his first television debut on the ITV series Free Scampies. He appeared alongside a Scottish hedgehog, Spike McPike. As of right now, it's not been made clear by ITV if any of these episodes still exist. The early surviving clip of Basil Brush I could find was from the 1967 BBC programme The Nixon Line, where Basil co-starred with the magician David Nixon. The clip came from a mini television documentary, TV Heroes. In 1968, Basil Brush would get his own spin-off TV show. It wasn't that long ago where in 2018 the earliest surviving episode was rediscovered in Nigeria, under the guidance of Philip Morris, self-proclaimed Indiana Jones of archiving lost television. The Basil Brush episode in question featured a live performance from the Kinks. When the episode was announced, it was screened at that year's Missing Believed Wiped event at the BFI, although as of right now the episode is not publicly accessible to watch. In 2001, the classic Basil Brush show received a DVD release, compiling all the most memorable clips and moments from the show. And then when the Doctor Who 1968 serial The Mind Robber came to DVD, it included as a bonus feature a sketch from the Basil Brush show, involving a Yeti which was actually a recycled Yeti costume from Doctor Who. As of right now, there are only 2 full episodes to view online of the original rendition of the Basil Brush show. I do recall many years ago an unofficial upload of a black and white Basil Brush program, however I was unable to relocate it for this video. I do hope that one day we'll get to see more classic Basil Brush episodes, as the character has continued to appear on British television over 60 years after his debut. The Goodies was a BBC comedy series starting in 1970, about 3 chaps running a business where you can hire them to do, well, whatever you want, usually making social satire of the biggest news or revelations of the day. The humour could be quite surreal and akin to a live-action Looney Tunes cartoon. The series ran for 8 seasons on the BBC, although come 1981 to 1982, The Goodies would go out with one final lineup of programmes on ITV, contributing a grand total of 9 seasons and 76 episodes. The show partially became inaccessible for a great many years. In 2003, there was a DVD release of 8 selected episodes, and then in 2005 there was a best-of compilation DVD set. But it wouldn't be until 2018 where the complete series of BBC episodes were finally released on a box set. And then come the following year, the remaining ITV episodes was released on physical media. Sadly, the most well-known episode, Kitten Kong, the original broadcast master copy, no longer exists in the BBC archive, being wiped over at some point during the 1970s. However, there was a duplicate copy made of the episode for the 1972 Montreal Film Festival. This version was a slightly extended and revised edit of the original episode, with only reportedly very minor differences between the two, such as in the ending of the original, the giant mice were represented by stock footage, chroma keyed into the shot, where instead in the festival version, they used giant model mouse heads bursting through a polystyrene wall as their grand finale. That's not the end of Goodies lost media. The following episode that comes after Kitten Kong, named Come Dancing, additionally doesn't exist in its original status anymore. You see, while all the Goody episodes were filmed in colour, there are several that only exist as black and white duplicates, with Come Dancing being one of the casualties. However, during the late 90s, a low-res colour copy was rediscovered at BBC Scotland, and combining that version with the higher quality black and white copy, they were able to somewhat restore the original colour, with that rendition being released in the 2005 Best of DVD compilation. Top of the Pops, airing on the BBC from 1964 to 2006, is a music chart programme hosting some of the most popular songs of the week. Unfortunately, broadcasting in the 60s and 70s, there were many episodes that were taped over. But thankfully, since the show was tremendously popular, there was a considerable amount of fans that did off-air recordings for their own personal use, saving episodes that would have been lost forever. And year by year, each of these personal collections would gradually get rediscovered and return back to the BBC archive. Although there are some episodes that do exist in the BBC archive that will never be put back in rotation, down to featuring now infamous celebrities, such as Jimmy Savile's hosting many episodes. His allegations wouldn't come to the light of the public not until after his death. The most desired episodes from Top of the Pops had to be the 3 times that the Beatles had guest starred. A clip for when they lip-synced to Ticket to Ride was actually used for the Doctor Who serial The Chase, and for many decades was the only surviving clip of the Beatles on the programme. That was until 2019 when it came to light that Beatles fan Peter Chandler, using his 8mm camera, actually recorded the Beatles' final appearance on Top of the Pops, when they were performing to the track Paperback Writer and Rain, now just leaving their first appearance on Top of the Pops for when they covered Rain, as the only one to have no surviving footage. With the exception of the missing black and white Doctor Who episodes, the lost Top of the Pops programmes with the Beatles probably is the most desired piece of missing British television. Doctor Who remains to be one of the most influential worldwide shows that the BBC has ever produced. With numerous of spin-off material and an ongoing continuity, there is much to explore with the Doctor Who canon, being the longest running sci-fi show in the world, but it was far from the first original sci-fi show that aired on the BBC. Predating Doctor Who by at least a decade was the Quatermass Experiment. The plot featured Professor Bernard Quatermass, who actually awaits the return of his rocket, being the first man-made mission into space. However, only 1 out of the 3 crew members return. But it turns out that the surviving astronaut may be contaminated with some kind of entity that spelt the doom for the other astronauts and maybe the world. It was a 6-part miniseries where the tone was much more somber compared to most other sci-fi stories of the time. The programme was fairly significant for the BBC in the early 50s, as it was the first made-for-TV live drama that was broadcast on the BBC in over 20 years. Because of this, the BBC took careful precautions to preserve the show by tele-recording them on the expensive 35mm film, the only practical way at the time to record a 30-minute programme, since this involves recording a television monitor. The picture quality is far from desirable, an imperfection from episode 2 where an insect inserts itself on the TV monitor. After this broadcast, the BBC decided to discontinue recording the remaining episodes, so out of the 6, only 2 were ever preserved, meaning the remaining 4 are likely lost forever.
That's dust everywhere, lining the wall behind the gridding. Centrifugal force might have spread it outwards from... well, from here. What did it do to them?
2 years later in 1955, a film adaptation was made of the series, created under Hammer Films. So if you really wanted to, you could experience the missing episodes in a condensed version. The Quatermass movie spawned 2 more sequels, and then in 2005 the BBC did a remake of the miniseries, filming it in the same live fashion as the original. This will likely be the closest way we'll get to experience the original lost episodes as they were originally produced. This is something I really love about the BBC, is their great affection on trying to fill in the missing gaps of their archive. Now, don't get me wrong, yes, in a perfect world, I would have rather if none of these programs went missing in the first place. But facing the grim fate which is reality, where the more time that passes, the less likely that many of these lost programs will ever reappear, going through the efforts of either trying to remake them or recreate them is at least commendable. It's kind of fun for whatever little surviving material from the original there is, to line it out with the new content, seeing how closely they match, debating on how faithful they are, etc, etc. The situation is kind of like Mozart's final piece. He died before he can complete it. So over the years, musicians have taken on board the task on trying to decipher the rest of the track. And of course, unless if you ever speak to Mozart beyond the grave, there will never be a definitive answer. But now his final piece has a life of its own, being reinterpreted having multiple different endings. Well, that's really up to the viewer to decide. Do you prefer the animated Dad's Army episode or the live action remake with the new cast? Do you prefer the photo reconstructions of the missing Doctor Who episodes? Or watch the animated renditions instead? Well, let me know in the comment sections down below, as that's my favourite kind of lost media discussions. If you yourself have any of these missing episodes mentioned on the list, or perhaps maybe a lead of other missing BBC programmes, and you want to see them safe and sound back in the archive, then I would recommend reaching out to BBC Archive Treasure Hunt. They mainly specialise tracking down programmes that were affected by the tape wiping, so pre-1980 shows. There's also Kaleidoscope, a non-profit organisation. They collect up and archive missing TV media, regardless as to how invested the original copyright holders are into the material. They're essentially the Lost Media Wiki before, well, the LMW. Anywho, I'll see you all in the next video. Ta-ta for now.